In this episode of Accelerate Slate, an enrollment fuel podcast, you will learn more about Slate.org from Sarah Kotlinski of Gettysburg College and Ian Harkness of Malvern Prep. We discuss what Slate.org is and how it can be used to share important information for colleges and high schools. We hear about the unique approach Gettysburg took to implement their counselor portal, and we learn about our guests' challenges and discoveries as they went through this process. We hope this episode can inspire you to lean into using Slate.org and think about how you can create a more robust experience for high school counselors. Hello, and welcome to Accelerate Slate, an enrollment fuel podcast. I am your host, Susanna Lehman, and I am here today with two very special guests. I have Ian Harkness, the Director of College Counseling at Malvern Prep, and Sarah Kotlinski, Director of Enrollment Systems and Analytics at Gettysburg. So today we are going to talk about a very exciting topic, which is how to better utilize Slate.org. So before we dive into that, I want to take just a second to let our guests introduce themselves. So Ian, would you like to give a little bit more of an introduction than I did?
Sure. Thank you for including me today, Susanna. Ian Harkness, Director of College Counseling at Malvern Prep, formerly an admission officer for 12 years and 10 of which at my alma mater, Gettysburg, which I feel like really informed my current role and a lot of the conversation we'll have today.
All right. Thank you, Ian. And Sarah, what about you?
Well, thank you for having me, Susanna. I'm Sarah Kotlinski. I'm Director of Enrollment Systems and Analytics at Gettysburg College. I've been here at Gettysburg in the enrollment division for 25 years and 35 years in higher ed.
All right. And so both of you have been doing a lot of work in the slate.org space. But before we dive into that, I'd love to hear you both kind of describe in your own words, what is slate.org? So let's start from the college admission side. So Sarah, if you want to kind of talk about it first, I'd love to hear your description.
Oh, absolutely. So Slate.org, from my perspective, is a free service that Technolutions offers to high schools, secondary schools. It's a place where they can submit documents to Slate institutions. They can also see the progress of their applicants through the funnel at any school who chooses to share that information. But the thing that I like most about it is knowing that it's something that there's no cost for it. And I think that's really key. I know a lot of institutional budgets are short, and so having this service available to any school in the nation is fantastic.
I also love the free aspect of it. So, and I'm not even at a college anymore or a high school. So Ian, what about you? How would you describe slate.org from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it has quickly become a beginning, middle, and end of my day through November through June. So Slate.org on the high school side gives us kind of the updates we need as applications arrive in college admission offices. Is a piece missing? Are we able to upload and provide that right directly to the Slate instance? At this time of year, literally this week, we are waiting every hour, refreshing to try and see any decisions as they're being shared by colleges. I don't know. It's definitely one of those things over the last 5 years that has become a critical tool just to do the job, beginning, middle, and end, from a college counselor's lens.
No, that's amazing. And, as I hear more and more schools going to Slate, I think this can become more and more of an opportunity for high school counselors and college counselors to be able to get to that information to really help their students. And as we already talked about, it is a little cheaper than some of the competing options out there. And by a little bit, the free part really does help quite a bit. So as you all at Gettysburg worked at developing your Slate.org portal, you already had kind of identified that there was a need to do more than just share the basic information. But you took a little bit of a different approach on this project than I think a lot of schools have when they've been developing this. So can you talk a little bit, Sarah, about what you all did and how you approached that project?
Yes, I am happy to do that. And before I do, I want to just give a visual framing for listeners who might not be familiar with what it looks like on the high school side. So there is a fair amount of native content in slate.org, which, like I said, colleges can choose to share or not share. But when the college counselors log in, 2/3 of their screen is that native piece of slate.org. And then there's a space on the left-hand side that's about 1/3 of the screen that is really up to colleges what they choose to do with that area. And I think many places just don't do anything, right? Because the main piece of it is such an effective communication tool. And I think places feel like, well, I have limited time. I'm not going to put my resources here. And so when we started thinking about what might we do with our slate.org portal, and when we say portal, what we really mean is that left-hand sidebar. We knew that if we wanted to do something, it was important to us that it really add value in addition to what was already there. And I have 3 guiding principles for my team, my enrollment services and analytics team, which are, does whatever system we're looking at, does it engage, does it inform, and does it simplify? And if it doesn't pass through those gates, then we're not going to do it. And so that was the lens that we took, figuring out how are we going to implement this slate.org portal. And like I said, I've been in enrollment for 35 years, but every one of those 35 years has been on the college side. And so it felt to me that it would be very presumptuous to think that I knew what counselors needed. That was
That
a
makes sense.
defining piece,
Yeah.
absolutely a defining piece. And so I wanted to start with counselors and ask them, what do you need? Maybe you don't need anything. Maybe you're fine with that sidebar being empty. Maybe, I don't know. Tell me what it is that you want, and then we'll build that rather than me starting with something and maybe it's what they want, maybe it isn't.
So how did you get counselors to buy into this process, and how did you use them? Use sounds like such a harsh word, but how did you uh, gather their feedback to make sure you were creating this more robust experience for them?
Absolutely. So we decided that it was important to have a defined role and a very clear ask. So we reached out to about a half dozen counselors, and they were people that either we knew because they were former Gettysburg admission employees who are now on the other side of the desk, or people that colleagues had built good relationships with over the years. And we went out and said, creating this advisory group, we'd like to invite you to join. Here are the kinds of things we're going to ask of you. Here's the time commitment that we think you'll need. And are you on board? And 4 of them said yes, they were. So that's how we started.
And I love that. And I love that you went out with those parameters. So, Ian, when you got that message, did you feel like, all right, I can commit to this? Or, how did that feel for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it worked quite well because it was more asynchronous. I mean, the challenge was pretty straightforward and clear. Gave us a chance to go in, share our thoughts based on what was showing up currently uh, in our Slate portal, but then also as things change to be able to share. I think that's what I've learned is the biggest challenge is that we can't see the same things. So being able to provide that back end, it worked well for us in terms of timing as well.
Yeah, and I think Sarah, when we had talked before, you had mentioned that was one of the challenges is that you couldn't see the back end. So, what kind of tools did you give the counselors, or what kind of questions did you find that really helped build this along?
Sure. I think the the starting place is that there's not still a way for colleges to really see what slate.org looks like from the high school counselor perspective. Technolutions has rolled out an impersonation so we can impersonate a school, but all that we see is that left-hand sidebar. we don't see that in the context of everything that they're seeing. So that was a little bit of a disconnect for us. At first, we started designing thinking that we had a little bit more real estate somehow than we actually did. So as far as the questions that we went out with, we just asked people what pieces of the existing slate.org did they find most helpful? What kinds of things were they seeing that were interesting and different from other places, that other institutions' slate systems? And then gave them a list of some of the things that we were kind of tossing around as possible ideas and saying, which of these do you like and which do you not like? And asking for the feedback that way. And as Ian said, it was completely asynchronous, and we just did a lot by email, but that actually worked really well because we could copy and paste screenshots and send them out to everybody. But then people were really good about reply all. So maybe Ian sent some responses, but then one of the other team members might look at Ian's responses and then comment on what he had said rather than each one providing their own feedback.
I love that. I think there's always synergy in having people see what each other are saying, so that you can build on that. And I, you all don't know this about me. I love doing brainstorming just because I always like to throw things out. And if it's an idea someone else can build on, great. If it's a trash idea, that's okay too. But I think in this type of space, anything you have to say is helpful in getting the motors running in other people's brains and getting them to think about things a little bit differently. So, Ian, I know you mentioned already you kind of liked that asynchronous style of the way this committee worked. But what do you think you got out of serving in this capacity?
I mean, I feel like a chance to voice some of the things that we see daily and discuss regularly among counselor groups that don't always make it back to the college leaders, right? Who can actually make a change. And so, like, this is one that I've shared for many years with my friends and colleagues on the college side. But, I feel like it gave a voice, it gave us a chance to kind of think creatively. I don't know. And in many ways, I think, I was glad that Sarah shared a couple of the dreams and the bigger goals that Gettysburg was thinking about, because we were also okay to push back and say that doesn't work yet. Or there were a couple of things that the group didn't necessarily um, see as a value in the same way, but that was also appropriate and listened to in some way.
I love that. And I think that is one of those challenges that, similar to Sarah, most of my experience is on the college side, and we know what we think, but really hearing it back from those who are sitting in your seat and makes a huge difference in pushing these things along. So we've, I love this idea of the advisory board. And in case we haven't hammered on it enough, I really want to make sure our listeners do hear the value of having an advisory board for this type of project. So, Sarah, do you want to talk first about that?
Absolutely, sure. The advisory board really helped us to feel like we were being efficient with the work that we did. And as Ian noted, there were some initial ideas that we had that they were like, well, yeah, that's nice, but maybe not so important. So we didn't spend time building those things. And even though I thought they were cool, it doesn't matter what I think is cool. What matters is what's going to be useful, what's going to really give the counselors more engaged experiences and help them feel like they know what they need to know, they can find what they need to find. So the advisory group for me just gave me confidence in the direction that we were taking.
And I love that because again, we beat our heads against the wall sometimes trying to come up with the right information, and getting the right from the source makes so much more sense. And Ian, what would you think? What do you think is the value of having the advisory board?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of touched on it a little bit, but I mean, as I think about my career, it's 22, 23 years now, and all in higher ed, both, admission and college counseling experiences. But I feel like the further I've gotten away from that admission counselor role, like the harder it is to see or remember what that view is from the ground. And like in many ways, like I think the value that I keep going back to after 10 years here in the high school seat, um, is that like with all the change in our profession, like there are some very basic things that just get overlooked. I would love it if deans and directors could spend a week with us and just to see and feel the life of 9 to 12th graders. And I think they would have in similar ways an experience that would help reshape some of the things they're thinking about. But, really for us, it's a chance to get our voice heard and to make sure that our students are supported. And I know these tools are popping up all across higher ed, but I feel like some of them are really, really strong. And I don't know, feel like I just flew to Chicago last year for the Slate.org conference specifically to say these types of things, because I really do feel like it's a benefit on both ends.
One of the challenges that I have run into years ago when Slate.org first became available was trying to convince high school counselors to use it. And I knew some high school counselors at one of the bigger schools in the Columbus area pretty well. And I was like, hey, can I ask you about this? And they're like, I don't have time. I don't want to learn another software. So that was kind of the response I got. But that was, again, when it first got rolled out. So as the tool has become more and more available, do you think more counselors are using it? Are you seeing an increase, hearing more conversations? And Ian, I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big pieces that has changed the most in this seat. There used to be a time when we would reach out and have conversations with certain colleges just to talk about the year, talk about, applicants potentially, depending on the time of year. Those counselor calls have kind of dried up, right? And in many ways for good reasons. But there's still a need on our end to close the loop. We spend a lot of time in the fall helping students get those applications out, polish essays, do all the work. And then there's still a need on our end to know what happened with that application.
Right. Yeah, you're invested at this point, right?
And I think that's what I feel is a really awesome opportunity here, and maybe where technology and college counselors have leaned in a little bit. The most frustrating pieces are trying to track all of those application documents, transcripts, recommendations. Slate.org can give us a chance to just easily rectify that in an instant if colleges are allowing us to do it. Colleges also, or high school counselors also love to see those college decisions. So, even if it's not something that is shared right away, but after the student has viewed that decision, I mean, our water cooler conversation, we actually have an aquarium, so we're feeding the fish most mornings here. But that feeding the fish conversation is more about what did we see, who got in, who didn't get in, how are we going to tackle it, what is the conversation with that family. It's really just giving us very basic parts that are required to do the job quite well, right? Or I hope that makes sense, and maybe we can cut that part. But I don't know. I feel like it's one of those tools that we're needing more and more, and talking about more and more as it's developing and more colleges are jumping in.
I love that. And also, are there other jobs open at Malvern so that I can go have
Yeah.
conversations at the aquarium?
Yes. Yeah. We just posted two, but not in
Oh,
college counseling. But at the same time, yeah, it's a good space.
I love it. It sounds like a very cool spot to be. Um, so tell me, during this process, what do you think was the most interesting discovery that you all had? And I'd love to hear both of your perspectives on this. But Sarah, do you want to kind of start with your most interesting discovery?
Sure. I think the most interesting discovery was that counselors are not monolithic in what they want. And there were places where there was divergence among the group as to what was useful or not useful. So, for example, we decided after some kind of rounds of feedback that we would present the lists of inquiries as well as, I mean, Slate.org natively presents applicants, but we wanted to show who had inquired, whether they had visited, what kind of engagement they'd had, that sort of thing. And there was a mixed bag from counselors about whether or not it was useful to have that information for every student in the pipeline or just for their seniors. So the end result was that we broke out two different lists. So there's a, here's your seniors, and then here are your underclass students and where they are in their Gettysburg journey. And I would never have thought about the importance of breaking that out had it not been for the feedback that I got from these folks.
Yeah, that's a very interesting one. I guess I would have just made the assumption they're good with getting it all and will filter through for what they want, but it makes sense that it would add clarity on the high school counselor side to be able to see that in two different lists. And what about you, Ian? Did you have any revelations as you went through this process?
I mean, I guess maybe my one general observation when I look at Slate in the morning is how many Slate schools are just not even showing anything in that space. And so, even just the basic turn it on to show that it's open and engaged, right? Instead of just, I mean, it's a space where counselor eyes will spend a lot of time. And part of where Sarah and I started this conversation a couple of years ago was with that, like, hey, there's this chance, like, what else could Gettysburg, or what are others doing in that space, and should Gettysburg be there too? And I loved that it's developed in this way. I don't know. I just think it's a missed opportunity in some way for certain schools.
I love that. And I think my hope is as people listen to this podcast, they'll be reminded that there are folks like you, Ian, who are looking at this on the regular. So it is not something that is a waste of time to set up or something that people are not using. And I think it helps to have advocates like you as well that are out there talking about how good it can be and that it doesn't have to be some kind of burden on the counselors as they're doing their work. Sarah?
Well, actually, I just wanted to add one other thing to what Ian is saying about how many schools aren't showing anything. My kind of near and dear to my heart, my passion project is really developing excellence in Slate training. And so I feel like I would be remiss as a trainer if I didn't take advantage of this opportunity, because one of the things that I think is easily overlooked when you first enter the slate.org arena as a second or as a college or university is that the permissioning to show your applicants is round based. So it's not a turn it on and it's on forever. You have to do that every year as part of cycle prep. And I wonder how many institutions don't realize that they aren't sharing because they turned it on 2 years ago and they think that it's still on. So I just want to kind of put that little reminder out there into the digital airwaves so that people can take a look and make sure that they are actually sharing what they think they're sharing.
I think that's a great plug. And you are probably right that somebody did it several years ago, forgot they did it, or just doesn't remember that that's part of what they need to do each year to make sure counselors can see all the data.
And not to add too much more there, but it is a very common thing in November to see last year's data still showing for this year's current applicants. I mean, I feel like I'm not speaking out of turn there because it happens more than once each year until, I think that
Well,
permission gets updated.
and I guess the question is, Ian, when you see that, do you feel like, oh, I should tell them, or do you just like what's the normal response? And sorry, not to put you on the spot, but
When we see it, we definitely reach out. I mean, I feel like there have been a couple instances where, like we knew someone at that university because they recruit our school. So we would just send a basic, hey, we noticed this hadn't been updated email. Um,
yeah.
Collegial, certainly.
I love that. Well, and it makes me think too the importance of potentially even having some kind of direct communication spot as we're thinking through the portal side to be able to say, "Hey, here's some quick feedback for you. You're out of date," or whatever the case might be. All right. So as we think about this project, it sounds like it's up and running. Life is good. What do you think was the biggest challenge in setting this up? And Sarah, I'll ask you this question.
Yes, I have one very clear answer to that. We actually just went live last week. send an announcement out, and we got wonderful feedback. People really, really appreciated it, really liked it. I mean, it was so gratifying that the goals that we set for building something useful, I think, were really well met. But one of the things that I really wanted to do that did get some good feedback from the advisory group, I had this idea because Gettysburg is using Campus ESP for parent communication and family
Sure.
communication. And they have, for anybody who's not familiar, they have a phenomenal newsletter tool where you can create posts, but then they live in a newsletter that people can access kind of at will, not necessarily just when they get it in their email box. And I loved that concept and wanted to build that, and got great feedback and resonance from the advisory group. So we decided that we were definitely going to do that. And we also, by the way, I will say, had a phenomenal technical partner from Enrollment Fuel, Dave DeBoer, who happens to also be a Gettysburg College graduate. Dave really brought my vision of that to fruition. However, that then meant that it was really important that we felt like we had adequately populated that newsletter before we turned this on to the universe.
Another layer of
And
pressure, right?
right. And so that was the biggest challenge, was just, okay, we've built this great tool, but now let's make sure we've got adequate content. And there was, I think, maybe a longer delay than I would have liked between when we finished the technical build and when we turned it on, and that was the reason, but it's okay. It's live. People like it, and it was worth the wait.
I love that. So, and Ian, would you have anything to add on that as far as biggest challenges? You didn't have to do the setup, but just thought I'd throw it out.
I didn't really feel a particular challenge here, but I think the general challenge is just getting more engaged, right, with using this tool and recognizing its value.
I, I love that. So, so as we think about this, and Sarah, you've kind of started thinking already on your next steps, but I would love to hear what you are planning to do next with this project.
Absolutely. Of course, I think it needs a burn-in period, right? And just some time for people to really feel like they've had a chance to look at it, for us to post some more content to see what kind of feedback that we get. But I have, at this point, two things in the works. I would like to add a place in our slate.org portal where counselors can tell us their preferred method of communication. So, do you want push notices from us? Do you just want to come here? Where do you want to get the most of your information? I think we need people to get used to the fact that we have a robust portal before we can ask that question, but that is a piece that's on my mind. And the other piece that's on my mind is, I think it's time for us to do some real proselytizing, because we've not been intentional in talking about slate.org, because we participated, but we didn't have this robust presence that we wanted to. But now that we do, I want, when our admission counselors are on the road in the fall, I want them to have a little flyer with a QR code that they can give to counselors and say, hey, are you in slate.org? If you're not, well, actually, we know that whether or not they've signed up, their institution has signed up for slate.org, but just to do some real outreach and hopefully get more schools to be to the point where Malvern is, and to the point where it becomes their morning, noon, and night check-in, just like it is for him.
Um, I think that's a great, I think those are great next steps. And yeah, the more we can get people using it, the better for all of us, and all the Slate schools. Hopefully, on the same side, they're hearing this and thinking, oh, I probably should go look at that and do a little bit more. So we're on our final question, which is really, uh, as we think about everything you all have learned in the process, what do you think are the two or three top key takeaways that our listeners should bring with them from this conversation? Sarah, do you want to go first?
Sure. I think that the first is that you need to allow adequate time. If you are going to do an advisory group, which I highly suggest that people should do, you have to understand that everybody's lives are really busy. And so you can't just figure that you're going to pull this together in a week. You need that time for the feedback and understanding that even if it's not your institution's deadline, somebody else's is, and counselors have primary responsibility to their students and their families. And so you might have to wait. And so allowing the adequate time is a piece of it. And the other thing that I would say is just dream big. Have a guiding precept that says, I want to make something amazing. Don't just phone it in and do the bare minimum. Make it something that's really special, because it's so helpful for your institution if that becomes a touchstone for counselors that they want to go back to.
Oh, yeah, I like this. I'm feeling so inspired right now. Sorry. This is just how I feel. Ian, what about you? What are your key takeaways that you'd like our listeners to hear?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big one I've shared all the way through is just counselors definitely have a relevant voice. And like viewing it through that lens is I think, even more critical piece as the world gets more complex in higher education. I think it can also free up other responsibilities and roles. So like as certain colleges have leaned into slate.org, it's taken, you know, less pressure off of their own version or their own portal where they were sharing decisions and other things previously. So I think there's maybe not as much work. There's definitely more work to do, but it's so valuable, especially if it's helping to alleviate other responsibilities as well.
Well, that is all of our questions today. So thank you, Ian, for that nice final note. As we end on that, we want to say thank you to both Sarah Kotlinski and Ian Harkness for joining the Accelerate Slate podcast today. Once again, I am Susanna Lehman, and we appreciate you all for listening. We'll be back again soon.